Bill Self was big time right, and it might have saved the KU basketball season.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of LOJ, we're talking Bill Self, Brice Dessert, why he was right, why it could be a big saving point, a big moment in the offseason for KU basketball in possibly saving the season in a real way. We're also going to get a little KU football talk, 3 KU football defensive players that are going to have a huge impact on whether KU reaches all of its goals and has a successful 2025 season, 3 returning defensive players for KU football at that. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Do that over at FanDuel. Okay, so Bill Self, what was he right about, you might be asking? Well, turns out, there's a little teaser if you're watching on YouTube, turns out that Brice Dessert, who is the international recruit that they were recruiting from France, really good center, would have been a really good prospect, really good addition if KU would have been able to land him and make things work from a impact perspective and what he could have brought to the table. Some of the scuttlebutt was that it even went as far as KU got Brice Dessert to commit to the program, but that they were unable to make those next steps with, questions about getting eligible, both in terms of, him getting paid with his previous club, the age that he was or is, I guess, in addition to, what was going on with the student visa pauses. There were just a lot of questions. Were they going to be able to get him eligible? And that kind of put them in a position to move on to another situation. Now, it wasn't a situation where they had to move on. It was a situation where Bill Self sort of could have said, okay, we don't care. We're taking the commitment here from Brice Dessert, and we're going to kind of roll with it, and we're going to try to get him eligible. We're going to fight tooth and nail to try to figure this out, to try to make this work, to try to get him overseas here to where he is a part of our rotation. And he would have been a really good fit as a backup center for Flory, probably even somebody who could play next to Flory for, short minutes at a time. The problem with all of that is that if you do bring on somebody who is a risk in terms of, are they going to be eligible? Are they going to be able to play or not? You end up in a situation where if you fall flat on your face, if that situation does not work out in your favor, now you're sitting there without anything. And so this was the news from, I guess, today that Anadolu Efes, which is a club in France, has completed the signing of Brice Dessert on a 2+2 year deal. Basically, he's getting a contract with a club in France. And why is that important, right? There was also some scuttlebutt, some talk, some rumors circulating, whatever you want to talk about, that Kansas State, that Jerome Tang was going hard after Dessert after things fell through with Kansas, that Kansas State was going to try to figure out the eligibility stuff and was going to try to make it happen and was going to try to maybe go a little bit deeper into that process than Kansas might have been willing to, than Kansas might have done. And so I don't know if this is going to have an effect on Kansas State in limiting them in some way, but let's just think about this from the Kansas perspective. Let's just think about, how this could have, could you imagine if Kansas did take the commitment and announced it with Brice Dessert? And as crazy as this offseason has been with Flory going in and out of the portal, with players that have been rumored to KU that didn't end up happening, with players that we've just talked about with KU that they maybe did or did not have interest in, that did or did not end up happening. And I mean, that would have been the ultimate cherry on top in an offseason that has really caused anxiety and stress at different points for KU fans. I think it's fine now with where the roster has gotten, with the most recent, or I guess final additions possibly, of Paul Mbiya and Kohl Rosario. That's fine now. But if we're talking at that point in time, if you were to bring this kid on and then it happened and then it got yanked away, I mean, it would just increase the kind of panic level around everything. But it's more so the idea of the opportunity cost that you would have lost had you had his commitment. So we think about Paul Mbiya, for instance, right? If you would have added the commitment from Brice Dessert. Now, I guess technically you could say, okay, Kansas would still have the open scholarships. Maybe they would have still gone out and said, hey, we still want to add Paul Mbiya, or we want to add this other big man as insurance, because you would be going through the trying to get Dessert the eligibility process. And maybe you would be saying, hey, we still need to bring on another guy. Maybe back when Pat Swemnick, before he committed to, I forget if it was Seton Hall or where, maybe that would have been more in play, or something like that, where KU would have still added another big man to say, okay, this is our insurance policy in case we can't get Brice Dessert eligible. But what if you wouldn't have done that? And it's not just about the theoretical of, okay, did you have an insurance policy? Did you have a backup policy? The longer we go in this, the more those backup policies, so to speak, start committing to other schools. The longer those players decide, okay, I'm just going to stay overseas and sign with this club for another year or another couple of years. And beyond all that, if you were getting a commitment from, say, Brice Dessert, if you would have stayed entrenched with the idea of, like, we're going to do everything in our power to get this guy eligible, to which him signing with a professional club probably tells me that, okay, because clearly he did have interest in coming overseas. Clearly he did have interest coming to college. The fact that he's signing with a pro team is that the pro team offered him such a good deal he couldn't refuse. I mean, that's possible, but why did it come so late? It's probably more likely than not that Brice Dessert is signing back with a club in France because that is his best option, and they don't know if he's going to be able to get eligible and coming to the U.S. And so if you were to get to this point now, if you're Kansas, and find out that that was going to be the case, if you would have taken the commit, if you would have, decided to go down that route, and let's say you had to say, okay, if you have $2 million left in your rev share, NIL, whatever, your money budget, your allotment that you're going to give to the roster, you're going to give to the players, and you have $2 million left, and you were telling Brice Dessert, hey, we're going to give you 1.2 million, or whatever the number would have been. I have no idea. 1.2 million to come over and do this. You can't go out and recruit, even though you haven't actually spent it, even though he hasn't officially come over. You can't go out and talk to these other players and be like, okay, cool, we got another commitment and he's going to come on for 1 million. And then you're like, oh crap, but then we couldn't pay Brice Dessert. It would essentially be like a cap hold in a way, where you would be saying, okay, we have $2 million left, but we need 1.2 reserved in case we can get Dessert eligible. Now we only have 800,000 to go work out on somebody else. And in that said situation, are you able to get a Kohl Rosario? Are you able to get a Paul Mbiya, right? So in this scenario, where if you would have taken the Brice Dessert commitment, if you would have fought and tried to make it work eligibility wise, and then it didn't happen, does Kansas just straight up not end up with Paul Mbiya, right? Does he back out of NC State and pick another school by now? Does he go to Oregon at this point? Does Kohl Rosario continue on with some of his other, visits, because he was scheduled to have all these visits over the course of summer, and eventually pick another school? Those are real questions that if Kansas would have gone all in on Brice Dessert, I don't know if it would have ended up working out in these other ways. And now Kansas is in a situation where, okay, theoretically, if you told me Brice Dessert and Paul Mbiya were both eligible for Kansas, I think Brice Dessert has the higher floor and probably is going to be the better player for this specific season. But again, you didn't know if you were going to get Dessert. Whereas with Mbiya, it's like, okay, he's here. He's on campus now at KU. Like, this is a thing. They are getting real minutes, real impact, real potential from what, Paul Mbiya could bring on the floor. And so this is what Bill Self was right about. He was right about the idea that he wasn't totally sure if this was going to work. And he said, you know what? I can't afford to take this risk. I have to go for this other stuff. I have to move on and find other options. He did just that with Paul Mbiya. He did just that with Kohl Rosario. And if he did not make that decision, I don't know if they have either player. And then you'd be sitting here right now in the middle of July going, hey, we don't really have a backup center. We still have a very incomplete roster, right? It would be kind of a mess. It would be kind of a disaster. So Bill Self made definitely the right decision, I think, is what that tells us. And it puts Kansas in a point where, like, if you still didn't have a backup center right now, like, I don't know, does that ruin the season if you're KU? But now you don't have to worry about that because Bill Self did make the right decision in the end. All right, KU football, 3 defensive players returning to the team this year. They're going to have a gigantic impact on how good the defense is and if the team is going to reach its goals here in 2025. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. You can get action for the Open in England this upcoming week, and that's always kind of a crazy one because it feels like if any of the golf tournaments lead into just like random names being at the top of the leaderboard, it would be the Open. So you can certainly get some fun ones for the Open and bet on that at FanDuel, as well as early odds for the college football season. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. That is FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Don't forget you make Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. And don't forget to tune into our Big 12 squads, which are Thursday afternoons, which you can find right here in our Locked On Jayhawks feed. Okay, three big KU football returning players that are going to have a big impact on the defense, whether it's successful, whether it's not, whether the team is successful, whether it's not in the upcoming 2025 season. I'm going to start in the defensive backfield, and we're going to go with Jalen Todd. I think Jalen Todd's going to, automatically you look at the corner position, right? You lose Melo Dotson, you lose Kobe Bryant. That is a ton of production. That is a ton of awards, recognition, accolades that those guys have accomplished at KU. They did so much for the Jayhawks defense. And so you have very big shoes to fill. And that's where Jalen Todd comes into this. And we actually saw Todd start to get a good amount of playing time at the end of last season. So overall, Todd is somebody who he's 6'1", 195-pound corner, originally from Detroit, part of kind of that Detroit, Michigan pipeline that KU's been able to establish. Came in as an 89 rated 3-star recruit, so nearly a 4-star recruit. Was really thought highly of, and comes in right away and gets playing time as a true freshman at Kansas, enough so that he didn't even, take a red shirt last season. That's how highly the staff thought of him, even on a team that had Melo Dotson and Kobe Bryant. And he ends up playing 151 snaps last season. But again, most of them come over the back half of the season. He plays over the course of 7 games for KU, but 6 of those 7 games came from week 6 on. So he's really getting majority of the snaps, 137 of those snaps over really the back half of the season. He ended up with 9 tackles, 2 pass deflections, though, stats for corners, the counting stats don't really do it justice. He had a 63.4 PFF grade. So, that's about an average level starter, which for a true freshman playing right away speaks to him having a very high potential. If that's your floor, if that's, your first time coming into the college game as an 18-year-old, I don't know how old he is, assuming 18, 19, whatever it is an average level starter, the sky's the limit for you, right? He had a 61.1 coverage grade as part of that too. And it really felt like something where, the Baylor game was kind of a disaster for KU, obviously, altogether. But I really remember Jalen Todd, and actually the PFF grades agree with it, kind of breaking out in that Colorado game toward the end of the season. It was your senior day. It was your final home game. He plays 41 snaps. He had a 76.4 PFF grade and a 77.2 coverage grade. He was targeted 4 times. He only gave up 23 yards receiving. So the next week against Baylor, grades aren't great, but I don't think the grades are really good for anyone for KU because that game was just obviously bad for Kansas. But point being, he has shown flashes. He's somebody that I think the staff trusts and somebody that I expect to be a starter this year for KU. Now, how close can he get to what you were getting with Melo Dotson and Kobe Bryant? I mean, you could make the argument if you're just looking at like recruiting rankings that maybe he has a higher ceiling than those guys. And I know that sounds crazy to say, given the awards those guys got. Neither one of those guys was also drafted, though. And could the ceiling of Jalen Todd be a future drafted corner? I mean, that's entirely possible, right? But he's going to have a big impact because you do lose so much there. You need him to at least be adequate. You're not asking him to replicate what those guys are doing. Be Jalen Todd and just be an adequate corner out there, right? And obviously you have some other transfers that come in that are going to make a big impact there as well. But if Jalen Todd can be a legit starting corner for KU, it makes finding that other corner spots, really those other 2 corner spots, because you're going to play a lot of 3 corners, It makes that so much easier as opposed to having questions about who even your number one guy is going to be. And how much improvement can you have from year 1 to year 2? You would certainly think there would be a big jump there. Speaking of a guy having big improvement onto his sophomore season, it'll actually be year 2 to year 3 technically. This is my other guy that I want to talk about, Taylor Davis, another defensive back. 6 foot, 185 pounds. He's a safety originally from the Texas area, and he was an 86 graded 3-star coming out in the class of 2023. He redshirts his first year at Kansas, and then this past season, he ends up recording 33 tackles with 1 pass deflection in Taylor Davis here. And so he ended up having to get on the field a little bit more because of some injuries for KU, but I think obviously that'll serve Davis and KU as a whole well this upcoming season. He ended up with 61.2 PFF grade, 317 snaps. So again, he played a lot of football for KU as a redshirt freshman. Had really good numbers as a run defender for a safety, 76.9 in run defense, 71.6 in tackling. He's got to have to work on the coverage, 53.1 in coverage, though. I don't always know what to take in terms of coverage grades on safeties from PFF because a lot of that's going to be scheme dependent and what is your coaching staff asking of you? But I was impressed with what Taylor Davis showed at certain times. And it'll be interesting, too, because is he going to be more of the free safety or the strong safety type for KU? And is he going to be moving from what he was playing last year to what he's playing this upcoming season? How does that affect his game? So that's going to have a big impact. But as much as we talk about KU losing their corners from last season, they lost their safeties, too, right? Experienced guys. OJ Burroughs was getting playing time for 4 years, really, and was really a 3-year starter for KU. Marvin Grant was a 3-year starter for KU and was a really good hitting box safety for KU. And so can Taylor Davis, come in and be somebody who, again, kind of fills those shoes? And for you to have success, not just this year, it is apparent this year because of all the players you lost last year, but just in general as a program, you have to be able to bring in good high school recruits, develop them for however long that takes. For some guys, 1 year, for some guys, 3 or 4 years, develop them and get them ready for when you do lose talent. They have to be ready to fill in and replace those shoes with either, similar or close to, or in some cases, even better production than the previous guy was there. That's what the best programs in the country do. That's what the consistent programs, that's what the programs that are winning 7, 8, 9 games every year do. They lose players. Maybe they don't get as good of a player coming in, but they at least fill the production similarly. And then maybe the player after that is even better, right? And so Taylor Davis represents that opportunity of somebody that the staff recruited, has developed, and now has an opportunity to make a big impact on the team and at a position where it's okay. I think Lyric Rawls could be a starter for this team. And then it's okay, there may be some questions. Who are the other safeties going to be? I think they have some interesting players, some interesting talent, but Taylor Davis is kind of the one you look at where it's okay, he's the incumbent. He's the guy coming back. Can him and Todd, both as kind of young players in the secondary, maybe there's going to be some growing pains, especially early in the season at certain times of the year. But by the time we get to the end of the year and over the course of the season, can you see enough flashes where those guys are making a positive impact on the defense and also making you feel good about, okay, once we get to 2026, when those guys have that full year under their belt, are they going to be possible studs? Are they going to be possible all-conference players in the future for KU? I have another defender that I think is going to have a huge impact that is returning to KU on the 2025 season, though doesn't really have a name. I'll tell you why in a second. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Again, don't forget you can check out Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. And don't forget to check out Locked On Big 12 as well. Okay, so we're talking the 3 returning players on the KU defense that are going to have a huge impact on the success of both the unit and or the team in 2025. And I talked about some of the young DBs with Jalen, Todd, and Taylor Davis. This one, I don't have a specific name, but I'll explain why. It's pick your favorite defensive tackle. Now, maybe the fact that DJ Withers went down with the team to Media Day, Big 12 Media Days, is indicative that he's the leader of the group and he's the guy to kind of go to. But maybe he's just the leader of the group, right? There's a chance that what if he's, talent-wise, the 3rd best defense tackle in KU, but he's the best leader, right? That could be why he got down there. I'm not saying that's the case. I think that probably is an indication that maybe he is the best defensive tackle on the team. But like Tommy Dunn at times last season, especially early in the year, showed some flashes of being a dude for KU. Blake Herold as a redshirt freshman last year was awesome over a lot of games, obviously a little bit more limited snaps than some of those other guys, but KU likes to rotate those D tackles. Keenan Caldwell probably had his best season for KU with right around 200 snaps a season ago. So like you look at those guys and like, you know, there's a lot you can point to. And then you bring Gage Keys back, who was starting to show some impressive flashes at the back half of his season when he started getting more playing time with Kansas before transferring away to Auburn. Now he's back into Kansas. So like, you look at those 5 defensive tackles, and you could convince me that any one of them breaks out. Now, maybe I would feel a little bit better about one guy over the other breaking out, but you could convince me it would be any of those 5. If I was picking 2 guys, I think I'd go with DJ Withers, right? Again, you have the maybe the leadership element, and it would be Blake Herold. The fact that Herold, who is not like an overly highly recruited guy, like he wasn't like a near 4-star or anything like that, but came in as just a redshirt freshman on the line and produced as well as he did. I mean, if we look at PFF grades, for instance, Herold was the highest rated defensive tackle for KU, 68.5 PFF grade. He had 9 pressures for the team. Keenan Caldwell had 1 pressure. He had a 67.9 rating. Marcus Calvin, that's 16 snaps, not a lot to go on there, but 67.4 PFF grade. So maybe he's somebody who can, factor into with a little bit more time. Tommy Dunn had a 64.5 with 13 pressures over 276 snaps. DJ Withers had a 62.3 with 15 pressures. So Withers actually had the most pressures, also played the most snaps at 365, but had the lowest PFF grade. But even then, you're talking about Withers being 62.3, and this is of the returning guys, not counting guys like Javier Darrett and Caleb Taylor, but like, again, like that puts you in the range where it's just like, okay, you're at the very least a solid starter. And it felt like Withers and Dunn a couple of years ago kind of broke out to the point of like, okay, they're at least they broke out from the point of being like they're developing to now they're playable, they're rotational, they're possible starters, stuff like that. And maybe that's what you're looking for from those first 2 guys we mentioned with Taylor Davis and and on the outside corner with Jalen Todd, right? Now it's like, can one of those 2 guys who would make those jumps with Dunn and Withers, can one of them 2 break out to being an all Big 12 caliber player or somebody who gets you 4 or 5 sacks or is a really good defense tackle, a game wrecking player? And maybe it's Herold, maybe it's Withers, maybe it's one of the other players, maybe it's none of them, maybe just all of them are, solid players you can rotate in and the sum of the parts equals something really good for KU. But if one of those guys can break out, and now you're talking about having like a legit all Big 12, even if it's like all Big 12 second team or honorable mention level defensive tackle next to a Dean Miller who had, 6.5 sacks a season ago, next to a Justice Finkley who you brought in from Texas, next to some other interesting defensive ends, whether they've been transfers into the program or young players you're cultivating along, and you have the rest of the depth of that defensive tackle room, you might be cooking with something as a defensive line. I don't know if like there's going to be that one guy like an Austin Booker or a Lonnie Phelps that KU has had at the pass rush. But maybe if that does happen, if that defensive tackle does break out, maybe it ends up being the best, 1 through 4, the entire defensive line that we've seen in the Lance Leipold era. And that would certainly help them be the best defense of the Lance Leipold era and maybe have a really productive season overall. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time for another edition of Locked On Jayhawks.